Hi guys, welcome to the instructional video on the skill component of Cali-Strength's free 2-week online coaching. So I'm going to take you through the skill stuff only now. So if you haven't watched the other video describes all the main concepts of how to use the file, but this video is going to focus very specifically on skill for the muscle up and handstand part. So anything that's in the A sections, so you have your warm-up boxes at the top. So these two boxes with green headers, that's your warm-up for a session, and then the main session, and then all of the sessions are color-coded in that way. So same for the middle day, the 3 days of training you have. But the A parts of the warm-up and the A parts of the main sessions are only for the skilled people. So if you're not doing that and you're not going to do that, this video might just be a waste of time. It's half an hour that you don't need to spend watching this until you decide to move on to this part of the training. So this is for the more advanced people who've already maybe got a bit of pulling and pushing strength and want to work on skills as well. So the same concepts apply as just outlined in the other video. So you're going to do your A warm-ups. So A1, 2, A3, these is like a 3 exercise circuit or triple set or tri-set that you're going to go through 2 sets each before you go into your main session work, which if you've done your A warm-ups, then you go to your A main session, and then once you've done your A main session, you go to your B warm-ups and then back to your B main session, etc., etc. We've already discussed that, so we won't go into any more detail on that. So your A warm-ups, your warm-ups are going to be the same across the weeks for the test sessions and the main sessions themselves. Again, this test session, we're going to figure out what your starting point is that defines the rest of the plan. So for the this is the more handstand part of the warm-up. You're going to make sure your wrists, very important to make sure your wrists are well warmed up for handstands, because you're going to put your whole body weight through them, and most people are not accustomed to that, and your wrists will need loosening up even to get into the right angles. So at least 90 degree, ideally a little bit more, so you've got room for moving forward and back with your arm when your wrists are loaded. You just want to make sure that position is well warmed up. So make sure you do watch these videos. And it's essentially about stretching the wrist out, loosening the wrist out, getting blood flow, getting the tendons and ligaments loosened up, because you're going to be in an extreme 90-degree position of wrist with full body weight going through it. So we want to gradually build that up. The banded dislocation is for the shoulders. Again, you're going to be loading the shoulders, and you want to mobilize the shoulders, because the positions that your shoulder have is relevant to keeping an efficient or holding an efficient handstand. We're not using too much strength. So you're going to want those loose and able to go into all positions that they can reasonably get into given your flexibility. Then the jumping muscle up, that's obviously specific to the muscle up. That shows you how to move during the muscle up. So we'll jump into that first. So these two, you can just watch the video and get a good idea of what you're supposed to be doing. From the muscle up perspective, it's a little bit more detailed, so we're going to talk about that now. So for the jumping muscle up, we're going to take away a lot of the strength component of the muscle up by keeping our feet on the floor and jumping using our legs. So the way I'm going to set myself up, you can use a bar that's lower than this. The higher the bar, the harder this exercise is. So if it's above head height, it's quite hard, so I wouldn't start there. I would start more around maybe chest height, maybe even lower. Like if you're finding, you're going to be essentially jumping over the bar, so if you're finding that tricky, the lower you go, the easier it is. Whichever height of bar you use, set your feet up below the bar, directly underneath it, so that if there was a line coming down from the bar, it would cut your feet in half. And then lean back like so, and we're going to swing in to this forward position. So you see I've swung from behind the bar, with my feet still underneath the bar though, but I've leant back, so my chest and head is behind the bar, and then I've swung forward to this position where the line, or I've created an angle, say, of about 30 degrees, so it's not quite 45, so let's say it's about 35 degrees. This line from my wrist down to my hip line roughly. If I was doing a full muscle up, my legs would be straight out here, but I'm just doing this version so I can practice learning this movement pattern that I'm going to need to use in the real thing. So I swing forward to that position and I jump and I lean forward. Now notice in this transition I've kind of ridden some momentum, so I've kind of used the swinging back and ridden the momentum of that swing and use that momentum to carry around the bar along with the jumping power for my legs and a little bit of pulling power for my arms and my back. But then I've landed, so I've swung back around behind the bar and then I've pushed my chest forward to the bar to land in a balanced position on the bar. So notice, because my hips are always going to be behind the bar when I land, because I can't, the bar is going to stop them from going any further forward. They're always going to be behind, so I need to counterbalance that with the weight of my chest being in front of the bar, and then again counteract that a little bit with the weight of my feet being a little bit either underneath or a little bit in front. You can see I'm in front here, and then I actually straighten up a little bit because I didn't quite need that much angle, but you can see the position here. I've got a little bend in my hip to keep me balanced. Notice I didn't need to push to the top either, so this is just us practicing the transition. So I come back down, land at the same spot, swing forward again, and string it together in the same movement pattern. Again, land with that slight bend. And that bend in the hip is crucial, because if I land with my, like, stiff as a plank, or if I try and just jump very straight, very vertical, so imagine I was just standing upright and I just jumped straight up and I tried to lean forward. Even if I managed, like in that instance, if I don't bend at the hip, I'm not going to get the weight of my chest in front of the bar. It's still going to be behind, so I'm just going to bounce right off. But even if I get a little bit of chest forward, but my legs are out here, for example, my legs are going to have to go somewhere from there. And when I land on this bar, they're going to swing underneath the bar, and the force of them my legs swinging that way is going to pull my chest back the other way. I'm going to fall off. Okay, so it's crucial that you land in this hip flex position. So you lean forward, you break at the hip. Okay, and if you notice, we'll do it full speed now. We'll just watch. So swing forward, I hit the angle, swing back, chest forward, land. Okay, that's your basics there of the jumping muscle up. So if we then take that across to the main muscle up, so the concept here is the same as in the other video. You've got all the various progressions that you could use across the plan. In this instance, they go from easiest at the top down to hardest at the bottom. So to work out this 3 rep max that we're trying to work out in this test session, that's going to inform the rest of the plan. Cool. So the easiest progression is a muscle up with the green and the purple. So I would try that for 3 reps, and if I can get it, great. And then I move to the next hardest progression. I get my 3 reps, great, I did it, I managed it, and then I move to the next, not that one, I move to green and red. And then maybe I only got 2 reps there. So that means for the purpose of this program, my 3 rep max is the green and the black band, which is the progression before I failed to get 3 reps. Okay. Resting as needed in between attempts. You may well find that you'll fail straight away because there is a lot of technique involved. So don't worry too much. Try, give it a good 10 minutes at least of attempting. If you're failing constantly at the initial progression and your pulling strength is quite low, it might just mean that you're not ready for this yet. So if you spend a decent 10-15 minutes working on this part and you don't get anywhere with it, obviously watch the videos back, compare your footage to mine and see you actually executing the technique efficiently and you're avoiding the points that I mentioned. I'll go into more of those in a minute, but that just might mean you need to take a step back, just do the plan without the skills to start with, build some strength, and then you'll be in a position later on to start actually training the muscle up effectively when you have enough strength. Okay, so let's look at the video. The video is just the same video with the green band, but it applies to all the different progressions. So if you're going to use green and black, or green and purple, or green and red, whatever it might be, or purple and yellow, or whatever the combination is that you land on in the order of difficulty, you just make sure the other band is secured next to this one and both feet go in both bands. So first point to think about on the setup. So notice now, because I was kind of pivoting around my feet when I had my feet on the floor in the jumping muscle up. Now I'm actually going to be swinging for real with my feet off the ground. So I need to set myself up behind the imaginary line that's coming down vertically from the bar, the middle line you would call it. I need to be behind that so that when I jump in or I swing in, I'm going to travel forward to that front position that I was artificially creating in the jumping muscle up. So if we watch that, and another thing to think about here is best practice, you can swing in with straight arms, but most people find it more effective if they do something like this. So you notice I do a little hop, but I've started the swing, you can see, with an angle in my arm. I'm not fully straight when I'm swinging, and that has the advantage of making the first rep, because the first rep you start from the bottom, the second rep you're going to be at the top and fall down, well not fall, but you're going to come down from the on top of the bar and land in this position. So what I'm getting at is basically that elbow bend makes it more similar to the second. You have less difference between the first and the second rep because they start from different positions, so they feel quite different. Anyway, so you can see there, let's go again, that's this position. I've swung down, and you can see I've replicated the position from my initial swing. So I want to get to this again 35-ish, 30-degree angle that I'd mentioned in the jumping muscle up, and that's the point at which I pull. So I've swung forward, and then I'm not traveling forward anymore, I'm not traveling back, and now I'm kind of motionless for a split second, and that's when I aggressively pull. So you can see I've bent my elbows a bit, I've started to drive my elbows down to use my back to create some height with my pull, and then again you can see as I transition around the bar there, you notice that I broke at the hip one more time, and you can see as I come down, I push back. But again, you see I'm replicating the position in the jumping muscle up. I've gone from a straight line in the bottom when I was pulling to a angle at my hip. Lean forward, push to the top if I can. I don't need to push to the top necessarily though. Let's just go through one more time. And we see I set up, and again one more time I'm going to go bump, swing in, keep the bent arm until I land in the bottom position. This creates consistency between first, second and third rep, like technique wise. Hit the front position. Now you can see there I've just started to come back, so I've initiated my pull now because it's a split second after I've started to transition back. So I'm just about starting to bend my elbows, bam, and you can see I'm starting, once my head is clearing the bar, I'm starting to already initiate that change in angle at the hip from that straight line that I had in the bottom to a bit of a bend, so not 90 degrees, but let's say 110 or so, this angle here between my legs and my torso. Okay, just the key thing is get the chest in front of the bar, don't let the legs come back. So the same thing applies that I mentioned before. If I was to land, instead of my legs being here, if they were back here, straight out, like straight line from shoulder down to my feet, my legs would swing out underneath in front of the bar, and then I'd pull my chest back and I'd fall off. Okay, all right. So that's your basics of the muscle up. Obviously more feedback can come if you're having other technique issues when you submit your footage at the end of the week. So that is the muscle up. And then the handstand progressions are simpler. You have elevated feet handstand, which can be broken down into multiple progressions, but that just depends. That's kind of for you up to you to decide. But we'll talk about that now. Now the reason you might use an elevation, I'll get rid of that. The reason you might use an elevation, so if you notice actually the first instance there, I've spaced myself away from the wall. I measured against the wall. You can watch that again. You'll see that I measured one hand width away from the wall. Just give me a little bit of space. And then you can see I've got this little box here, which is having the effect of elevating my feet. And the main effect it has is elevating my hips, because sometimes people just don't have the strength or the confidence to kick up. So if they elevate their feet, now this elevation, as I alluded to before, can be way higher if you need it to be. The higher it is, the easier it is essentially, because it has the effect of just getting my hips closer and closer to the wall. Eventually my hips are going to go above my hands, and that's how I'm going to balance. So you'll see if I just swing my leg over, and that's start my hips traveling this way to over top of my head and my shoulders and my wrists. And then you can see how that would affect it. If I had a higher elevation, those hips would be a bit higher and a bit further forward, so closer to the point they are now. When I land on the wall, I want my hips to be a little bit in front of my hands, because I don't want to bounce off the wall. If my hips are perfectly on that line, it runs the risk of me just bouncing off the wall. So they're a little bit in front. Now, before I do anything, I've started, they were a little bit further close to the wall here, so there's an imaginary line that's even weight distribution. If my hips were on that line, I'd be balancing, and all my legs, my torso, my arms, my hands were all on this imaginary vertical line, I'd be balancing, and I wouldn't need to do anything. But to get onto that balanced line, the hips start a bit in front of it, so I'm on the wall and I'm not falling. I push my hips back. You see, do you see that subtle movement? My hips push away from the wall, and now my feet are just gonna come off slightly. Now that might happen without using your hands, but what you want to try and get into the habit of is push the hips away from the wall until your feet start to feel light on the wall. Then your fingers are going to be the things that you press hard into the floor that bring your feet off the wall for the last part of it, okay? So imagine it's the analogy is the same as if you're standing and you start to fall forward, you press hard through your toes and that stops you falling forward. You could try it now if you like. And it will push the weight back into your heels, so you're again balanced and you're not going to fall on your face. Same concept applies with handstands, but your fingers have become your toes. So, but your fingers are only so strong, so you need to move the weight of your hips to a point where your fingers can actually have an effect, because otherwise they're just going to be, you're outside the range of their strength. So if the hips are really if they were literally touching the wall, your fingers are not going to have an effect. But you can see I've pushed my hips basically over onto this line. So now when I press hard through my fingers, it's pulled my feet off the wall. And you can see, if I zoom in a bit, you might be able to see a little bit better. You can see that arch in my fingers there. I'm pressing really hard to keep off the wall. Okay, one more time. Pull off the wall. Boom. Okay. And again, that elevation is just there to help you get up to the wall. You can use as little or as much as you like. Cool. And then the other version is literally exactly the same, just without the elevation. So if you don't need it, it's better to not use it, but you can still effectively practice handstands with an elevation. You don't have to do it from the floor. If you can't do it from the floor, it doesn't mean you're not ready to train it. It just means you need to build up the strength over time, and that can you basically gradually reduce the height of that box. Anyway, exactly the same thing applies here. You can see, and I'll talk a little bit about something else here. So now I've fallen back on the wall, and again, you might find yourself falling off and on the wall several times within one attempt. That's also fine. If we look here, where have I gone? Reload that. Go again. So I space myself again away, one hand width. I kick up in the same way. Vertical arms, notice as I kick up, keep my hips high, one little kick to get myself warmed up, and I chuck my leg over to the wall, and then that was a more subtle one. Now if you watch in this next one, I've done a slightly different technique. So the first one's like, you could say like a cleaner version. It's more gymnastic-y pleasing straight line, but this is more realistic. This is actually much easier to balance in, because you've had the effect when you arch like this, you bring all of the weight a bit closer to the floor, you spread the weight over a wider distance from left to right, so it's easier to balance. So notice my head's a little bit further forward than it was. I've got more of an arch, but I'm still pushing my hips that way to come off the wall, and then you see here now my feet have just come off, but that was still through. I pushed my hips to that point, and then I'm pressing hard through my fingers, okay? And my heels float, and then I can hold it in this slight arch, and that is more realistic, to be honest. If you're holding something like this for a second to start with, and then you fall back to the wall, that's great. In this specific instance, I just straighten up just because I can, but that's, to be honest, that's bit harder and a bit down the line. But if you're just coming off the wall and floating for a couple of seconds, falling back on, that's fine. And your attempts will be like this. You'll do a kick up, maybe it won't result to anything, you'll come down, you'll just shake it off, reduce the fatigue, and then go again. And maybe 2, 3, maybe even 4 attempts like that, and you get maybe you get a second of balance on one of them, maybe you get 2, maybe you get none, but then you're a bit fatigued, so you would superset that with your muscle up. So in this example, we'll talk about how you'll move back and forth in your main session between the two. But you've basically now in this test session figured out what your 3 rep max for a muscle up is, what your handstand progression you're going to use is. So now you would obviously go through and finish the rest of that test session, but the other video goes through that. So now that I've defined these exercises, it's populated in the rest of the plan. So you see here, if I delete that, it gets rid of that exercise and through in that position and in the rest of the plan. So once I've defined that, that defines most of the rest of the plan apart from this. So the yellow boxes are wherever you need to enter something. I've just added this in the second week because you may well progress to, you may be able to do a harder band. So you can just try it with the next progression or the next 2 progressions up or whatever you think, or you know, the next progression up is probably a reasonable jump. You might be able to do 3, who knows? But try and do something slightly harder here is the goal. It might not be, you might just put it as the same exercise, the same version that you did in the first week, and go from there. So the structure is now, as we alluded to before, you're going to do your A warm-ups and then do your A main session, and then that skill component is done and you move through the plan. Okay, you move from B warm-ups to B main session, and that's essentially it. There's nothing much more to go through. Your volume stays relatively low for the skill work. First session, 6 sets of 1 to 3 reps. So you might write down something like this. So you've got a rep range there. So if you've done a 3 rep max with this is your 3 rep max, right? That you figured out in this test session. So you might you might be able to get a few sets of 3 and then it might drop. But so you've got that rep range to go with there. And then next session, the target rep range has increased slightly, but you've also got your notes here that you've left, so you can figure out, you can try at least to get maybe something a bit better. So maybe you get a couple sets of 4 and then it's a 3 and then whatever it might be. You're just trying to improve session to session essentially. And you'll work back and forth between the handstand. So in this instance, while you've got the file open, you might do your first, I would say start on the handstands. So you do an attempt there, and then you go back to the muscle ups, you do your muscle ups, and then you're back to the handstands. And in that fashion that I described, you do maybe 3 or 4 attempts as mentioned, as described with the handstand practice, and then you go back and do your set of muscle ups, and then hopefully your shoulders will have, the fatigue will have dissipated enough that you can go back to your handstands, practice effectively, and switch back and forth like this. So handstand and muscle up, essentially the muscle up is mostly pulling. There's a bit of push, but it's essentially a pulling skill. So, and handstand is a kind of a push. It's more push than anything else, even though it's a static hold. So, but it's just shoulder strength. So you can work a pull and a push quite nicely together, as does the rest of this plan in the strength work. So that's why I've paired the muscle up and the handstand in this way. The idea being with the handstand, it's just a time allotment. There's no specific sets and reps because it's less about that in the handstand. It's more about quality, right? Obviously, you want the trend over time to be able to practice for longer with more quality for more of that time duration. But actually putting sets and reps on that is probably not the optimal way to go. It's just about just letting it naturally happen over time, and it will naturally happen if you're consistent with your practice. Okay, so that's essentially it, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember, you want to take video footage of that. The form descriptions that I gave is going to help a lot. If you stick to that, make sure you're filming yourself, and you can compare and contrast within a session. Like watch the videos of the examples that I've got in the file with your own videos and say, okay, I didn't actually do what he said about keeping my legs bent in the transition there and having an angle at my hip. My legs were behind, that's why my legs swung under and I fell off. Do that kind of stuff within the session, but then obviously you've got that opportunity to send me video at the end of the week, and I can pinpoint where you might be going wrong, where the gaps are in your technique, and how you can improve and be more effective in the next week's training. So thanks again, guys. Obviously this plan will get more bespoke once you've done the free trial and you decide to move on to premium. You may well need other progressions to practice effectively in the handstand and the muscle up and all of the other stuff. And then, you know, there's other strength stuff that you might want to add in that's not in this plan, different calisthenic skills. You know, the world is your oyster in that regard when it comes to the bespoke planning, because it's, you know, it is bespoke to your goals and wants and needs, and it's built in that way. But this is a good way to get started and figure out if online coaching is right for you. You know, the basics of it are there, the feedback and the way I deliver the program, the basics are the same, but obviously it becomes much more bespoke when you get into the nuts and bolts of it in the premium. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, and I will hopefully see you on the other side. All the best with your training.